You wake up in complete darkness. Not the comfortable darkness of your modern bedroom with blackout curtains and climate control, but the suffocating, bone-deep darkness of a Norse winter that has lasted 4 months and shows no sign of ending. The air around you is thick with smoke that burns your lungs with every breath. Your eyes water immediately, stinging from the acrid fumes of burning whale oil mixed with the perpetual haze of a central fire that hasn't been extinguished in weeks. T-Way, smell hits you like a physical blow. It's not just one odor, but a symphony of human misery and survival that would make your modern stomach revolt instantly. Unwashed bodies pressed together for warmth. The metallic tang of blood from yesterday's slaughter of the winter's last pig. Fermented fish rotting in wooden barrels. Human waste frozen in outdoor pits. The cloying sweetness of infection from wounds that will never properly heal. And underlying it all, the musty, wet dog smell of wool clothing that has been worn for months without washing, now permanently saturated with sweat, smoke, and the accumulated grime of a harsh existence. You try to sit up and immediately regret it. Your back screams in protest against the wooden boards you've been sleeping on. There's no mattress, no pillow, just rough-hewn planks covered by a thin layer of straw that's been compressed into a hard mat by months of use. The straw crackles beneath you, and you feel something small and many-legged scurry across your hand. Lice. They're everywhere in your hair, your beard if you're a man, crawling along the seams of your clothes. The itching is constant, maddening, a torture that never stops. Your breath comes out in visible puffs of vapor. The temperature inside this longhouse is barely above freezing, despite the central fire that burns continuously. You can hear the wind howling outside like a living thing, trying to claw its way through the wooden walls. Those walls are thick, yes, but they're not insulated. Frost forms on the inside surfaces and cold air seeps through every gap between the logs. Your extremities are numb, your fingers, toes, the tip of your nose. This is what warmth means in 9th century Scandinavia. Not dying of hypothermia, you're not alone in this misery. The longhouse stretches out in both directions, disappearing into the smoky gloom. Dozens of other bodies are pressed together on similar sleeping platforms that line both walls. Entire families share single sleeping areas barely 6 feet wide. Privacy doesn't exist. You can hear old Bjorn coughing up phlegm that's been accumulating in his lungs for weeks, a wet, rattling sound that means he probably won't survive until spring. You can hear Astrid trying to quiet her crying infant, a baby born 2 months ago who already shows signs of malnutrition. You can hear the whispered arguments of couples trying not to wake others while they discuss whether they have enough stored food to last until the ice breaks. Still think those Viking documentaries got it right? Welcome to your new reality. You are now a member of a Norse farming community in what will one day be called Norway, around 850 CE. The year has been harsh. The summer was too short, the harvest too small, and winter came early with a vengeance that has already killed 3 of the oldest members of your community. You live in a longhouse with 47 other souls, ranging from newborn infants to ancient elders whose exact ages no one remembers because counting years precisely is a luxury your people can't afford. The longhouse itself is an engineering marvel of its time, but a nightmare by any modern standard. It stretches nearly 100 feet in length, constructed from massive oak logs that took an entire summer to fell, transport, and assemble. The roof is covered with layers of birch bark, then sod, then more birch bark, creating a thick but imperfect barrier against the elements. When it rains, water drips through constantly, creating puddles that freeze into treacherous ice patches during winter. When snow piles up on the roof, and it piles up to depths of 6 feet or more, the entire structure groans under the weight, and everyone holds their breath, hoping this won't be the night the roof caves in. The central fire pit dominates the middle of the space. It's not a cozy fireplace like you might imagine, but a practical necessity that determines whether everyone lives or dies. The fire burns continuously from the first frost until the last thaw. Maintaining it is a sacred duty passed between families in shifts throughout the night. Let the fire die and everyone could be dead by morning. The smoke is supposed to rise through a hole in the roof, but wind and weather often drive it back down, filling the longhouse with choking clouds that leave everyone's eyes red and streaming. Light is precious and scarce. During the endless winter months, there are only about 4 hours of dim daylight. The rest of the time, you live in a world illuminated only by the central fire and occasional oil lamps made from carved soapstone bowls filled with whale blubber or seal fat. These lamps produce a flickering, smoky light that barely pushes back the darkness. Reading is impossible, not that most people can read anyway. Fine craftwork becomes nearly impossible. You live in a world of deep shadows where faces become indistinct and every corner might hide danger or surprise. The air inside the longhouse is alive with sounds that would drive a modern person insane. Constant coughing from lungs damaged by smoke inhalation. The rustle of straw and clothing as people shift in their sleep. Whispered prayers to gods who seem increasingly distant as the winter drags on. The scratch of rats and mice that share your living space, constantly searching for crumbs of food. The crack and groan of timber expanding and contracting with temperature changes. And always the wind outside. Sometimes a whisper, sometimes a shriek, sometimes a roar that shakes the entire structure. Your sleeping space is a narrow platform built against the wall, raised slightly off the ground to avoid the worst of the drafts and dampness. You share this space with your family, spouse, children, elderly parents, unmarried siblings. Personal space is a concept that doesn't exist. You sleep pressed against other warm bodies not for comfort, but for survival. Your bedding consists of whatever animal skins you could accumulate over the years. Sheepskins, cowhides, the occasional wolf or bear pelt if you were lucky enough to kill one. These skins are your most valuable possessions, literally keeping you alive through the winter months. The smell of the longhouse varies by season, but it's never pleasant. In winter, it's a combination of wood smoke, unwashed humans, stale air, and the gradual decay of stored food. In summer, it's sweat, cooking fires, and the inevitable insects that breed in any organic matter. The floors are packed, earth-covered, with a thin layer of straw that gets changed when it becomes too foul to tolerate, which isn't often enough. Spilled food, human waste from children too young to make it outside, blood from butchering, all of this soaks into the floor and becomes part of your living environment. Still think you'd want to experience authentic Viking life? Let's talk about what it means to be clean in a world without soap, hot running water, or any understanding of germs. Your last real bath was probably 4 months ago before winter set in. And by bath, we don't mean a relaxing soak in hot water with bubbles and scented oils. We mean standing naked in a frigid stream, scrubbing yourself with coarse sand and plant fibers, shivering violently while trying to remove layers of accumulated grime from your skin. Your hair is a disaster. It's long. Everyone's hair is long, because cutting it short offers no protection against cold. And maintaining short hair requires constant attention and sharp tools that are too valuable to waste on vanity. Your hair is matted with grease from your scalp, fragments of food from meals eaten with your hands, and a thriving ecosystem of lice that have made their home in the warm, oily environment near your scalp. The lice bite constantly, creating small wounds that become infected, leading to scabs that flake off into your food and bedding. You don't have a toothbrush. You don't have toothpaste. Dental hygiene consists of occasionally chewing on fibrous twigs that might help scrape some of the buildup off your teeth. But this is more superstition than effective cleaning. Your teeth are stained brown and black from the constant smoke exposure. They're worn down from years of eating coarse, gritty bread that contains fragments of stone from the grinding process. Many of your teeth are already loose or missing entirely. Dental pain is a constant companion. Abscesses, cavities, gum disease that makes your mouth taste like infection. Your breath is a weapon. The combination of rotting teeth, gum disease, and a diet heavy in fermented fish and sour milk creates an odor that would make a modern person gag from 3 feet away. But everyone's breath smells like this, so you've become immune to it. Kissing, when it happens at all, is a brief affair because prolonged mouth-to-mouth contact is genuinely unpleasant. Your fingernails are cracked, broken, and embedded with dirt that has been accumulating for so long it's become part of the nail itself. You use your hands for everything: eating, working, relieving yourself, tending to wounds. And there's no way to get them truly clean. The skin on your hands is cracked and bleeding from constant exposure to cold and rough materials. These cracks become infected regularly, leading to painful swelling and occasionally serious illness. Let's discuss toilets, or the complete lack thereof. There is no bathroom in your longhouse. When nature calls during the freezing winter months, you have several unpleasant options. You can venture outside to the communal waste pit, which means putting on layers of clothing, trudging through snow that might be knee-deep, and exposing your most sensitive body parts to air so cold it can cause frostbite in seconds. The waste pit itself is a frozen nightmare, a hole in the ground surrounded by mounds of frozen human excrement that won't decompose until spring. Many people, especially the elderly and sick, use chamber pots inside the longhouse. Crude, wooden or ceramic containers that get emptied when they're full, or when the smell becomes unbearable, whichever comes first. These pots are a source of constant odor and disease transmission. Children and the infirm sometimes simply relieve themselves in their bedding, creating a cycle of washing and rewashing the same animal skins that serve as blankets. Toilet paper doesn't exist. You use whatever's available: scraps of cloth, smooth stones, bundles of moss or leaves when they can be found. In winter, this often means using the same cloth scraps repeatedly, or simply not cleaning yourself properly at all. The result is constant irritation, infection, and disease that spreads through the close-quartered community. For women, menstruation is a monthly nightmare. There are no sanitary products, no privacy, no understanding of hygiene that might prevent infection. Women use rags that get washed when possible and reused indefinitely. During winter, washing anything is nearly impossible, so menstrual rags become breeding grounds for bacteria. Many women develop serious infections that lead to fever, pain, and sometimes death. Your clothing hasn't been washed in months. It can't be. There's no hot water, no effective soap, and wet clothing in winter means death from hypothermia. Instead, you live in the same wool tunic, trousers, and cloak day after day, night after night. The wool has absorbed every odor your body has produced, every drop of sweat, every spill of food or drink. The fabric is stiff with accumulated grime and bodily oils. It chafes against your skin, causing sores that become infected. The lice aren't just in your hair, they're in every piece of fabric you own. They lay eggs in the seams of your clothing, creating an endless cycle of infestation. You can spend hours picking lice and nits from your hair and clothes, but you'll never get them all. They bite you constantly, leaving red welts that you scratch until they bleed, creating more opportunities for infection. Personal hygiene extends to your living space as well. The straw on your sleeping platform is changed maybe once a month if you're lucky, twice if you're wealthy enough to have abundant straw stored for winter. This straw becomes compacted with sweat, dead skin cells, food scraps, and bodily fluids. It becomes home to fleas, mites, and other parasites that feed on your blood throughout the night. Water for washing, when available, is ice cold and precious. Every drop has to be carried from a stream or well that might be hundreds of yards away. In winter, this water has to be melted from ice using precious fuel that's needed for cooking and heating. You can't waste water on luxury cleaning when that same water might be needed for drinking or cooking the thin soup that's keeping everyone alive. And this is just winter. Summer brings its own hygiene nightmares, swarms of biting insects attracted to your unwashed body, heat that makes your already filthy clothing unbearable, and the constant threat of dysentery from contaminated water sources. Still think you'd prefer authentic living over modern conveniences? Breakfast doesn't exist as a concept. You eat when there's food available, and you eat whatever that food happens to be, regardless of taste, texture, or your personal preferences. This morning, if you're lucky, you'll get a bowl of watery porridge, made from barley that was harvested months ago and has been slowly developing mold in storage. The grain is coarse and gritty, ground by hand on stone querns that leave fragments of rock in the flour. These stone particles wear down your teeth with every meal, but refusing to eat means starvation. The porridge is cooked in a communal iron cauldron that hasn't been properly cleaned in weeks. Previous meals have left a residue that adds interesting flavors to whatever's cooking today. Sometimes it's the tang of fermented fish, sometimes the bitter taste of overcooked vegetables, sometimes something unidentifiable that makes your stomach churn. But you eat it anyway because this thin, unappetizing gruel might be the only food you get today. Your primary source of protein is fish, but not the fresh, flaky fish you might imagine. Most of your fish has been preserved through methods that would horrify a modern palate. Fermented fish, buried in the ground for months until it reaches a state of controlled decay, is a staple. The smell alone is enough to make visitors vomit, a pungent combination of ammonia and rotting flesh that burns your nostrils. The texture is soft and slimy, and the taste is intensely salty with overtones of decomposition, but it provides essential nutrients and can be stored for months without spoiling further. Dried fish is another staple, and it's exactly as appetizing as it sounds. Fish that's been air-dried until it has the texture of leather and roughly the same flavor. You have to gnaw on it for several minutes before you can break off pieces small enough to swallow. The salt content is so high, it makes your mouth burn and your eyes water, but it won't kill you with disease-causing bacteria, which makes it infinitely preferable to fish that's gone bad in ways that will cause violent illness. Meat is a rare luxury, and when it's available, you eat every part of the animal. Nothing is wasted because waste means death. You eat the organs that modern people discard, liver that tastes like iron and has the consistency of wet sand, kidneys with their distinctive sharp urine-like flavor, intestines that are chewy and taste like whatever the animal ate before it died. The brain is considered a delicacy, served still warm with a texture like chunky pudding and a taste that's indescribably foreign to modern palates. Blood sausage is a common food, made from pig's blood mixed with grain and stuffed into intestines. It has a dense, crumbly texture and a metallic taste that coats your mouth. The casing is tough and chewy, and sometimes you find fragments of whatever the pig ate, twigs, stones, undigested grain, mixed into the sausage. Vegetables are scarce and mostly preserved through fermentation. Sauerkraut that's so sour it makes your face pucker and your stomach acid churn. Pickled turnips that have the texture of soft wood and taste like vinegar mixed with earth. Root vegetables that were harvested months ago and have been stored in root cellars where they've developed soft spots, sprouts, and sometimes fungal infections that give them interesting new flavors and textures. Your bread is dense, dark, and often moldy. It's made from whatever grain is available. Barley, rye, sometimes oats, mixed with whatever else can be found to stretch the supply. This might include ground acorns, which are bitter and astringent, or even sawdust and bark during the hungriest times. The bread is baked in communal ovens that are fired irregularly, so sometimes your bread is burned to charcoal on the outside and raw in the middle. Sometimes it's infested with weevils or other insects that add protein, but subtract from the dining experience. Dairy products exist, but they're nothing like what you know. Milk is consumed fresh when available, but cows and goats produce very little during winter months. Most dairy is preserved through fermentation, sour milk that's thick and chunky, with a taste that's aggressively acidic. Cheese is made through primitive processes that result in hard, crumbly products with strong, often unpleasant flavors. The cheese is frequently infested with mites that create tiny holes and add their own distinctive taste. Let's talk about what you drink, because clean water is not a given. Your primary beverage is ale, but not because anyone particularly enjoys it. Ale is safer than water because the brewing process kills many of the bacteria and parasites that would otherwise cause violent illness. But this ale is nothing like modern beer. It's weak, often sour, sometimes contaminated with wild yeasts that give it unpredictable flavors ranging from vinegar sharp to sickeningly sweet. The ale is brewed in whatever containers are available, sometimes wooden barrels that previously held fish or meat, sometimes pottery vessels that have been used for other purposes. These containers are never perfectly clean, so your ale always has interesting additional flavors. Sometimes it's slightly fishy, sometimes it tastes like whatever was previously stored in the container, sometimes it has gone partially bad and has a yeasty, bread-like flavor that coats your throat. Water, when you drink it, comes from streams, wells, or collected rainwater. There's no filtration, no purification, no understanding of the invisible threats lurking in seemingly clean water. You regularly consume water that contains animal waste, dead insects, algae, and bacteria that cause dysentery, typhoid, and other diseases that kill people regularly in your community. You've learned to identify water that's obviously contaminated. It smells bad or has visible foreign matter, but you can't detect the microscopic threats that cause most waterborne illnesses. Milk, when available, is consumed immediately after milking because there's no refrigeration. It sours quickly, especially in warm weather, and sour milk is often the only milk available. Fresh milk is a rare treat, and it tastes different from modern milk, stronger, sometimes with flavors that depend on what the cow or goat has been eating. If the animal has been foraging on wild plants, the milk might have bitter or medicinal tastes. Mead exists, but it's a luxury reserved for special occasions. Real mead made with honey is expensive because honey is precious and difficult to obtain. More often, what's called mead is actually a fermented drink made with honey mixed with other cheaper ingredients, resulting in beverages that are sweet, but also harsh and often contaminated with wild yeasts that cause unpredictable effects. Your diet lacks essential nutrients that modern people take for granted. Scurvy from vitamin C deficiency causes your gums to bleed and your teeth to fall out. Night blindness from vitamin A deficiency makes it difficult to see in the already dim lighting conditions. Rickets from vitamin D deficiency, exacerbated by the long winter months with minimal sunlight, causes bone deformities and pain. Anemia from iron deficiency leaves you constantly tired and weak. Food poisoning is a regular occurrence. Without refrigeration or understanding of food safety, you regularly consume meat, dairy, and other perishables that have begun to spoil. You've learned to identify foods that are obviously rotten, but you can't detect the subtle signs of contamination that cause illness. Stomach cramps, diarrhea, vomiting, and fever are common experiences that everyone accepts as part of life. Meals are communal affairs, but they're not pleasant social gatherings. Everyone crowds around the fire, fighting for position close enough to stay warm but not so close as to get burned by flying sparks. You eat with your hands and maybe a knife from wooden bowls that are never properly cleaned. You share drinking vessels with people who have open sores in their mouths, spreading diseases that cause painful infections. The winter diet is especially monotonous and depressing. The same few preserved foods, day after day, week after week, month after month. The lack of variety isn't just boring, it's psychologically crushing. Modern humans rely on the pleasure of eating to provide small daily rewards that help maintain mental health. Your meals provide no pleasure, only the basic nutrients needed to survive until tomorrow. And this is assuming you're getting enough food at all. Late winter is starvation time. When stored food supplies run dangerously low and everyone loses weight they can't afford to lose. Children stop growing, adults become gaunt and weak, and the elderly begin dying of malnutrition combined with the cold and disease. The lucky ones die quickly. The unlucky ones waste away slowly, becoming skeletal figures who haunt the longhouse like living ghosts. Still hungry for that authentic Viking experience? Your entire wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. Not one outfit that you wear regularly while owning others. One outfit, period. This is every piece of cloth you own in the world, and you wear it every single day and night until it literally falls apart, at which point you might be lucky enough to inherit clothing from someone who has died, or you might have to go without. Your undergarments are a linen tunic and trousers, assuming you're wealthy enough to own linen. Linen is expensive, difficult to produce, and precious enough that many people go without. If you don't have linen, you wear wool directly against your skin, which is a special kind of torture. Wool that hasn't been properly processed is coarse and scratchy, like wearing a hair shirt made from steel wool. It chafes against your skin with every movement, creating raw patches that become infected sores. This linen tunic, if you're lucky enough to have one, was white when it was new, but that was years ago. Now it's a dingy yellow-brown color, stained, with sweat, blood, food, and bodily fluids that have accumulated over months of continuous wear. The fabric is thin and worn in places, developing holes that let cold air against your skin. The seams are coming apart because the thread is weakening from constant stress and the acids in your sweat. Over the linen, you wear a wool tunic that reaches to about your knees. This tunic is your most important garment, and it shows the wear of constant use. The wool is felted and matted from moisture and friction, creating a fabric that's stiff and uncomfortable. The original color, perhaps brown or gray, has faded to an indeterminate muddy hue. The sleeves are shorter than they were originally because the cuffs have worn away entirely, leaving frayed edges that catch on everything. Your trousers are also wool, dyed with plant materials that have faded to uneven, splotchy colors. The dye wasn't color fast, so it runs whenever the fabric gets wet, staining your legs and any other clothing it touches. The trousers are loose and baggy, not because that's the fashion, but because tight-fitting clothes require more skill and fabric to make, both of which are luxuries your community can't afford. These trousers are held up by a leather belt that's cracked and stained with age. The leather wasn't properly tanned. Tanning is a complex skill that requires materials and time your community often can't spare, so it's stiff and brittle. It cracks when it gets cold, splits when it gets wet, and has a permanent odor of the animal it came from, mixed with the substances used in the primitive tanning process. Your cloak is your most valuable piece of clothing, literally worth more than most of your other possessions combined. It's made from the finest wool your family could afford, woven tightly to repel water and wind. But even this valuable garment shows the effects of constant use. The edges are frayed, there are holes worn by sparks from the fire, and stains that will never come out no matter how much scrubbing is applied. The cloak is fastened with a brooch that serves as both functional fastener and status symbol. If you're wealthy, this might be bronze decorated with simple patterns. If you're poor, it's more likely carved bone or even just a sharp stick pushed through the fabric. The brooch pin is dull and bent from constant use, and it tears small holes in the cloak fabric every time you fasten it. Your footwear is perhaps the most important and most problematic part of your wardrobe. You wear leather shoes or boots, but leather that's been processed with the limited resources available to your community. The leather is thick and stiff, providing protection from rocks and cold ground, but it's also inflexible and uncomfortable. It never quite fits properly because custom fitting requires skills and time that are luxuries. These shoes have no real sole in the modern sense, just thick leather that's been doubled over and stitched together. The stitching is done with sinew or plant fibers that rot and break regularly, causing the shoes to come apart at the worst possible moments. You repair them constantly with whatever materials are available, creating shoes that are more patch than original leather. The shoes are never waterproof despite the thick leather. Water seeps in through the seams, the lace holes, and tiny cracks in the leather. Once your feet get wet, they stay wet for days because there are no spare shoes to change into and no way to dry the ones you're wearing except by body heat. Wet feet in cold weather lead to frostbite, infections, and painful conditions that make walking agony. You don't have socks in any modern sense. If you're lucky, you might have strips of cloth or fur that you wrap around your feet. But these provide minimal cushioning and no moisture management. More often you wear your shoes directly on bare feet, leading to blisters, calluses, and sores that never properly heal because you can never rest your feet long enough. Your hands are protected by mittens, not gloves. Gloves require more skill and materials to make, and they're less warm than mittens. Your mittens are made from scraps of fur or leather, sewn together with whatever thread is available. They're bulky and make fine work impossible, but they're the difference between having fingers and losing them to frostbite. The mittens are never quite waterproof, and wet mittens are almost worse than no mittens at all. Wet leather or fur becomes stiff and cold, providing no insulation while still making it impossible to use your hands effectively. You spend much of the winter with hands that are simultaneously too cold to feel anything and too clumsy to do delicate work. Your head is covered by a hood attached to your cloak, or by a separate cap made from scraps of fur or wool. This head covering is essential for survival. You lose massive amounts of body heat through your head, and exposed ears will freeze and fall off in severe cold. But the hood also restricts your vision and hearing, making it difficult to be aware of your surroundings. Under your clothes, your skin is a map of the discomfort your clothing causes. Red welts where the wool rubs against your neck and wrists. Raw patches where seams chafe against your skin with every movement. Infected sores where the constant pressure and friction of ill-fitting clothes has broken the skin and allowed bacteria to enter. Your clothing smells like a combination of wet dog, wood smoke, human sweat, and various organic materials that have been absorbed into the fabric over months of wear. The smell is so strong and pervasive that it creates its own microenvironment around you. Modern people would find it physically difficult to stand close to you because of the odor. Changing clothes is not something that happens regularly. You might remove your cloak and outer tunic when you sleep, but the inner layers stay on continuously. for weeks or months. Removing all your clothes would mean exposing your body to air so cold it could cause immediate frostbite, and there's nowhere private to change even if you wanted to. Laundry is a major undertaking that happens rarely. It requires large amounts of hot water, which means using precious fuel. It requires soap, which is expensive and often unavailable. It requires time for the clothes to dry, which in winter might mean several days during which you either go without or wear wet clothing that could kill you. Most importantly, it requires spare clothing to wear while your regular outfit is being washed. And spare clothing is a luxury almost no one can afford. When laundry does happen, it's a community event. All the women work together, heating water in large cauldrons, scrubbing clothes with harsh soap made from animal fat and wood ash. The soap burns their hands and makes their skin crack and bleed. The clothes come out cleaner, but also more worn and damaged from the harsh treatment. Even after washing, your clothes never smell clean by modern standards. The soap doesn't remove all odors. The fabric retains smells from previous wear, and the clothes pick up new odors from the environment where they're dried, usually the smoky interior of the longhouse. Your clothing provides inadequate protection from the elements that are trying to kill you. Wind finds its way through every gap and opening, cold seeps through the fabric, and moisture from rain or snow soaks through despite your best efforts to stay dry. You are constantly cold, frequently wet, and always uncomfortable. Still think historical clothing was more romantic than modern fabrics? You wake up, if you can call it waking, when you've barely slept due to cold, hunger, and the constant noise of 47 other people trying to survive the night before dawn. Not because you want to, but because survival demands every possible minute of daylight, and daylight is scarce during the winter months. You have perhaps 4 hours of dim, gray light to accomplish everything that needs to be done to keep yourself and your community alive for another day. Your first task is checking the fire. If the person responsible for the night watch has fallen, asleep or died during the night, the fire might be reduced to glowing embers or, in the worst-case scenario, completely extinguished. A dead fire in winter means the entire community could be dead by morning. You blow gently on the embers, add carefully hoarded kindling, and gradually build the fire back to a level that will provide heat for cooking and warmth for the day ahead. Fuel for the fire is a constant concern. You need wood, but not just any wood. Green wood produces too much smoke and not enough heat. Rotten wood burns too quickly and provides little warmth. You need seasoned hardwood, which takes years to properly dry and is a valuable commodity that determines whether your community survives the winter. Every piece of wood has been carefully collected, evaluated, and stored. Wasting fuel is literally a life or death decision. Finding firewood means venturing outside into conditions that can kill you. The temperature might be 20 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, with wind that drives the cold through your inadequate clothing like knives made of ice. Snow might be knee-deep or higher, making every step an exhausting struggle. You trudge through the forest looking for dead branches that haven't been claimed by other desperate communities, breaking off what you can carry, dragging larger pieces behind you through the snow. Your hands become numb within minutes of starting this work. The cold is so intense it causes physical pain, like being stabbed with needles made of ice. But you can't stop working, because stopping means death. You develop frostbite regularly. The skin on your fingers and toes turns white, then red, then black as the tissue dies. You lose feeling in extremities for days or weeks at a time. Some people lose fingers or toes entirely, amputated by the cold with no medical intervention, beyond hoping the wound doesn't become infected. Water collection is another daily survival task that modern people can't comprehend. You need water for drinking, cooking, and the minimal cleaning that prevents disease from killing everyone immediately. But in winter, water sources freeze solid. You must break through ice that might be several inches thick, using whatever tools are available. Axes, hammers, sharp stones, anything that can penetrate the frozen surface. Breaking ice is exhausting work that leaves you sweating despite the freezing temperature. The sweat then freezes on your body, creating a layer of ice against your skin that makes you even colder. Your clothes become stiff with frozen sweat and moisture from your breath. But you can't rest, because water is essential for survival. and the hole you've created in the ice will start freezing over again within minutes. Carrying water back to the longhouse is treacherous. You use whatever containers are available, leather bags, wooden buckets, pottery vessels. But these containers are heavy when full, and walking through deep snow while carrying heavy loads is exhausting and dangerous. You fall regularly, spilling precious water that has to be collected again. The water starts freezing as soon as it's exposed to air, creating slushy ice that's difficult to pour and use. Animal care is essential for survival, but it's brutal work that never ends. Your cows, goats, and pigs are kept in shelters that are barely adequate to prevent them from freezing to death. These shelters are dark, cramped spaces filled with animal waste, spoiled feed, and the constant threat of disease that could kill your livestock and leave your community without essential protein and materials. You spend hours every day mucking out animal shelters, removing frozen waste with your bare hands or primitive tools. The waste doesn't decompose in freezing temperatures, so it accumulates in piles that become part of the landscape until spring. The smell is overwhelming, a combination of decomposing organic matter, ammonia from urine, and the distinctive odors of various farm animals living in close quarters. Feeding the animals means rationing precious hay and grain that was stored during the harvest. There's never enough feed to keep the animals properly nourished through the entire winter. You watch your livestock slowly starve, becoming gaunt and weak, knowing that losing even one animal might mean the difference between your family surviving and dying of hunger before spring. Milking cows and goats in winter is a special kind of torture. You have to work with bare hands because mittens make it impossible to grip the teats properly. Your hands become numb within seconds, making it difficult to maintain the steady rhythm needed for efficient milking. The animals are, cold and cranky, more likely to kick or move unexpectedly. The milk freezes almost immediately in the bucket, creating a slushy mixture that's difficult to use and impossible to strain properly. Food preparation is a constant battle against spoilage, contamination, and scarcity. You spend hours every day processing whatever food is available, trying to make it last as long as possible while preventing it from becoming so rotten that it will kill you. This means cutting mold off bread and cheese, scraping the green slime off meat that's been stored too long, and making difficult decisions about whether food that smells bad is still safe to eat or has crossed the line into poison. Cooking happens in the communal cauldron over the central fire, which means everything tastes like everything else that's been cooked in the same pot. Today's soup carries flavors from yesterday's stew and last week's boiled fish. The cauldron is never properly cleaned because that would require large amounts of hot water and scrubbing materials that are too precious to waste on cleanliness. Instead, you rinse it with cold water and hope for the best. Preparing grain for consumption is back-breaking work that consumes hours every day. Barley and rye must be ground by hand using stone querns, heavy stone discs that you rotate against each other to crush the grain into flour. Your arms and back ache constantly from this repetitive motion. The flour is always coarse and gritty, filled with fragments of stone from the grinding process. This stone dust wears down your teeth with every meal, but flour is essential for survival. Tool maintenance is a daily necessity because your tools are precious and irreplaceable. Your axe blade is dull and chipped from constant use, but there's no blacksmith readily available to repair it properly. You spend time every day sharpening blades with whetstones, straightening bent implements, and trying to repair handles that have cracked from cold and stress. When a tool breaks completely, it might be months or years before you can replace it, if ever. Textile work never ends, and it's primarily women's work, though everyone participates when necessary. Spinning wool into thread using primitive spindles is tedious, time-consuming work that produces thread of uneven thickness and quality. The spindle drops constantly, unraveling hours of work in seconds. Your fingers become raw and bleeding from handling the coarse wool fibers, but you can't stop because thread is essential for repairing clothes and making new garments. Weaving cloth on primitive looms is even more challenging. The looms are simple wooden frames that produce fabric slowly and with great effort. The thread breaks regularly, requiring careful repairs that are visible in the finished cloth. The fabric that emerges is uneven, coarse, and often contains flaws that make it less durable and attractive, but it's the only fabric you'll have. Sewing and mending clothes is a never-ending task. Your single outfit is constantly developing tears, worn spots, and holes that must be repaired immediately, or they'll expand until the garment is unusable. You sew by the dim light of the fire or oil lamps, straining your eyes and working with thread that's often of poor quality. The repairs are visible and crude, creating a patchwork appearance that marks you as someone who can't afford new clothing. Hunting and fishing provide essential protein, but they're dangerous, uncertain activities that often result in failure. Setting traps for small game requires knowledge of animal behavior, careful construction of trapping devices, and regular checking of trap lines through difficult terrain. Most of the time, you find your traps empty, or containing animals too small to feed your family. Larger game is rare and dangerous to hunt with primitive weapons. Fishing through ice is a particularly miserable activity. You must maintain holes in the ice by breaking them open daily, then sit motionless for hours in freezing temperatures, waiting for fish that may never come. Your hands become too numb to feel when fish are biting the line. Often, you spend entire days fishing and catch nothing, wasting precious time and energy while exposing yourself to potentially fatal cold. Preserving meat and fish when you're lucky enough to obtain them requires immediate action and careful technique. Smoking meat over fires that must be maintained constantly for days or weeks. Salting fish with precious salt that's expensive and hard to obtain. Fermentation processes that can go wrong and turn valuable protein into poisonous waste. Failure in food preservation doesn't just mean losing a meal. It might mean the difference between surviving the winter and starving to death. Building and maintaining shelter is work that never ends. The longhouse requires constant repairs, as logs shift with temperature changes, creating gaps that let in cold air and moisture. Chinking between logs must be repaired regularly, using mud, moss, and other materials that provide temporary solutions to permanent problems. The roof develops leaks that must be patched before they create major structural damage. Snow removal is a constant winter task that's both essential and exhausting. Snow accumulates on the roof in quantities that could cause structural collapse. It blocks doorways and pathways, making movement around the settlement impossible. It drifts against walls and creates ice dams that channel water into the living spaces. You spend hours every day shoveling snow with primitive tools, moving the same snow repeatedly as wind redistributes it. Waste management is a disgusting but essential task. Human waste must be removed from the longhouse and disposed of properly, or disease will kill everyone quickly. This means carrying heavy, smelly containers through snow and cold to disposal sites that are far enough from living areas to prevent contamination of water supplies. The waste disposal areas become monuments to human misery, frozen mountains of excrement that won't decompose until spring. Every task takes longer and requires more effort than modern people can imagine. Simple activities like getting dressed, preparing food, or moving from one place to another become major undertakings that require planning, preparation, and physical effort that leaves you exhausted. There are no labor-saving devices, no efficient methods, no shortcuts that reduce the enormous amount of work required to survive each day. The workday doesn't end when the sun sets. It just becomes more difficult and dangerous. Essential tasks must continue by firelight and oil lamps that provide minimal illumination. You work by feel more than sight, increasing the risk of injury from sharp tools, hot surfaces, and unstable footing. Burns, cuts, and other injuries are common and difficult to treat properly. Sleep is not rest. It's just another form of survival activity. You sleep fitfully, waking frequently to tend the fire, check on sick family members, or respond to noises that might indicate danger. Your sleep is interrupted by cold, hunger, pain from injuries, and the constant stress of knowing that tomorrow will bring the same exhausting struggle for survival. Still think you'd prefer a life of honest, manual labor to modern conveniences? Medicine and suffering. When you wake up with a fever, there are no thermometers to measure it, no medications to reduce it, and no understanding of what's causing it. Your body burns with heat while you shiver uncontrollably, soaked in sweat that freezes against your skin in the cold longhouse. Your family watches helplessly as you alternate between burning up and shaking with chills, knowing that fever kills people regularly, and there's little they can do except wait to see whether you'll recover or die. The closest thing to a doctor in your community is the local wise woman, an elderly woman who has accumulated knowledge about healing through decades of trial and error, superstition, and treatments passed down through oral tradition. Her medical knowledge consists of herbal remedies that sometimes work through pure chance, religious rituals that provide psychological comfort but no actual healing, and primitive surgical techniques that are more likely to kill you than cure you. When you develop a serious infection, perhaps from a cut that became contaminated with the constant filth of your environment, the wise woman's treatment options are terrifying. She might recommend bloodletting, based on the belief that removing bad blood will cure illness. This involves making cuts in your arms or legs and allowing blood to drain out until you're weak and dizzy, further compromising your body's ability to fight infection. Leeches are considered advanced medical technology. These blood-sucking parasites are applied to infected areas with the belief that they'll draw out the poison causing illness. In reality, they introduce additional bacteria into your bloodstream while weakening you through blood loss. The sensation of leeches attached to your skin, the cold, slimy texture, and the feeling of them swelling with your blood is nauseating and psychologically disturbing. Herbal treatments sound natural and harmless until you experience them firsthand. Many medicinal plants are toxic in doses just slightly higher than the therapeutic amount. You regularly consume teas and poultices made from plants that cause vomiting, diarrhea, hallucinations, and other symptoms that might be worse than the original illness. The wise woman's knowledge of dosages is imprecise, based on guesswork and tradition rather than scientific understanding. Pain management doesn't exist beyond alcohol and the occasional opium poppy preparation, if you're lucky enough to live in an area where such things are available. Most pain, from injuries, diseases, dental problems, and chronic conditions, must be endured without relief. You learn to function with levels of constant pain that would incapacitate modern people. Broken bones heal crookedly because there's no way to set them properly. Dislocated joints remain permanently damaged. Chronic pain becomes a constant companion that affects every aspect of your life. Dental problems are a special form of torture. When your teeth develop cavities, and they will because of poor nutrition and lack of cleaning, the pain is excruciating and constant. The infection spreads through your jaw, causing swelling that makes it impossible to eat or sleep. The only treatment is extraction, performed without anesthesia using crude tools that are more like torture devices than medical instruments. Tooth extraction involves holding you down while the wise woman uses metal pincers to grip the infected tooth and pull it out by brute force. The pain is indescribable, a combination of crushing pressure, tearing tissue, and bone being separated from bone. You often pass out from the pain, which is considered a mercy. The extraction leaves a bleeding hole in your mouth that takes weeks to heal and often becomes infected, potentially causing more serious problems than the original tooth. Childbirth is a death sentence that women face regularly. Without understanding of hygiene, proper nutrition, or medical intervention, pregnancy and delivery kill women and babies at rates that would shock modern people. Women in your community expect to lose half their children before the age of 5, and many women die in childbirth or from complications afterward. Labor happens in the same smoky, unsanitary longhouse where everyone lives. There's no privacy, no sterile environment, no trained medical assistance. The wise woman's obstetrical knowledge consists mainly of superstitions and rituals that provide no actual help. Women labor for days without effective pain relief, often dying of exhaustion, blood loss, or infection. Postpartum care doesn't exist. New mothers are expected to return to full work responsibilities within days of giving birth, regardless of complications or their physical condition. Postpartum infections, which modern medicine prevents and treats easily, kill women regularly. Breastfeeding problems, which modern lactation consultants can resolve, result in malnourished babies who fail to thrive. Infectious diseases spread through your close-quartered community like wildfire. Smallpox, tuberculosis, pneumonia, and other diseases that modern vaccines and antibiotics have made rare or treatable are regular killers in your world. When someone develops a contagious illness, there's no way to isolate them effectively. They continue living in the same cramped space with everyone else, spreading disease through coughing, shared food, and contaminated surfaces. The progression of infectious disease is horrifying to witness. You watch family members and friends develop symptoms that grow progressively worse over days or weeks. Fever that makes them delirious. Coughing that brings up blood. Skin eruptions that ooze pus and leave permanent scars. Weakness that leaves them unable to feed themselves or control their bodily functions. And through it all, you know that you might be next because exposure is unavoidable in your living situation. Mental illness is completely misunderstood and often attributed to supernatural causes. Depression, anxiety, and other psychological conditions are seen as spiritual weaknesses or possession by evil spirits. Treatment consists of prayer, fasting, and sometimes physical abuse designed to drive out demons. People who would benefit from modern psychiatric care are instead subjected to treatments that make their conditions worse. Seasonal affective disorder is inevitable during the long, dark winter months, but there's no understanding of this condition or effective treatment for it. You become deeply depressed as the days grow shorter and the isolation more complete. The combination of poor nutrition, constant stress, lack of sunlight, and social pressure creates psychological conditions that push people towards suicide and violence. Surgery, when attempted, is performed without anesthesia, antiseptic techniques, or proper instruments. Operations are conducted with whatever sharp tools are available. Knives used for food preparation, needles used for sewing, heated metal implements that serve as crude cautery devices. The patient is held down by multiple people, while crude procedures are performed by someone whose surgical knowledge comes from treating injured animals. Wound care consists of washing injuries with water that may or may not be clean, applying poultices made from plants that may or may not have healing properties, and hoping infection doesn't set in. Many minor injuries that modern medicine would treat easily become serious, life-threatening conditions. A simple cut on your hand could lead to blood poisoning that kills you within days. Broken bones are set using crude splints made from whatever materials are available, strips of wood, leather bindings, cloth wrappings. There's no X-ray technology to ensure proper alignment. No cast materials to maintain position during healing. Bones heal poorly, often leaving you permanently disabled with limbs that are shorter, weaker, or positioned incorrectly. Chronic diseases that modern medicine manages effectively are death sentences in your world. Diabetes kills quickly without insulin. Heart conditions cause sudden death with no warning or treatment options. Kidney disease leads to slow, painful death as toxins accumulate in your body. Cancer grows unchecked until it causes agonizing death through organ failure or blood loss. The psychological impact of constant medical suffering affects everyone in your community. You live with the knowledge that any illness or injury could kill you quickly and painfully. You watch people you care about suffer and die from conditions that seem minor by modern standards. The fear of pain and death becomes a constant background, anxiety that colors every aspect of your life. Still think natural healing was superior to modern medicine? Medicine and suffering. When you wake up with a fever, there are no thermometers to measure it, no medications to reduce it, and no understanding of what's causing it. Your body burns with heat while you shiver uncontrollably, soaked in sweat that freezes against your skin in the cold longhouse. Your family watches helplessly as you alternate between burning up and shaking with chills, knowing that fever kills people regularly, and there's little they can do except wait to see whether you'll recover or die. The closest thing to a doctor in your community is the local wise woman, an elderly woman who has accumulated knowledge about healing through decades of trial and error, superstition, and treatments passed down through oral tradition. Her medical knowledge consists of herbal remedies that sometimes work through pure chance, religious rituals that provide psychological comfort but no actual healing, and primitive surgical techniques that are more likely to kill you than cure you. When you develop a serious infection, perhaps from a cut that became contaminated with the constant filth of your environment, the wise woman's treatment options are terrifying. She might recommend bloodletting, based on the belief that removing bad blood will cure illness. This involves making cuts in your arms or legs and allowing blood to drain out until you're weak and dizzy, further compromising your body's ability to fight infection. Leeches are considered advanced medical technology. These blood-sucking parasites are applied to infected areas with the belief that they'll draw out the poison causing illness. In reality, they introduce additional bacteria into your bloodstream while weakening you through blood loss. The sensation of leeches attached to your skin, the cold, slimy texture, and the feeling of them swelling with your blood is nauseating and psychologically disturbing. Herbal treatments sound natural and harmless until you experience them firsthand. Many medicinal plants are toxic in doses just slightly higher than the therapeutic amount. You regularly consume teas and poultices made from plants that cause vomiting, diarrhea, hallucinations, and other symptoms that might be worse than the original illness. The wise woman's knowledge of dosages is imprecise, based on guesswork and tradition rather than scientific understanding. Pain management doesn't exist beyond alcohol and the occasional opium poppy preparation, if you're lucky enough to live in an area where such things are available. Most pain, from injuries, diseases, dental problems, and chronic conditions, must be endured without relief. You learn to function with levels of constant pain that would incapacitate modern people. Broken bones heal crookedly because there's no way to set them properly. Dislocated joints remain permanently damaged. Chronic pain becomes a constant companion that affects every aspect of your life. Dental problems are a special form of torture. When your teeth develop cavities, and they will because of poor nutrition and lack of cleaning, the pain is excruciating and constant. The infection spreads through your jaw, causing swelling that makes it impossible to eat or sleep. The only treatment is extraction, performed without anesthesia using crude tools that are more like torture devices than medical instruments. Tooth extraction involves holding you down while the wise woman uses metal pincers to grip the infected tooth and pull it out by brute force. The pain is indescribable, a combination of crushing pressure, tearing tissue, and bone being separated from bone. You often pass out from the pain, which is considered a mercy. The extraction leaves a bleeding hole in your mouth that takes weeks to heal and often becomes infected, potentially causing more serious problems than the original tooth. Childbirth is a death sentence that women face regularly. Without understanding of hygiene, proper nutrition, or medical intervention, pregnancy and delivery kill women and babies at rates that would shock modern people. Women in your community expect to lose half their children before the age of 5, and many women die in childbirth or from complications afterward. Labor happens in the same smoky, unsanitary longhouse where everyone lives. There's no privacy, no sterile environment, no trained medical assistance. The wise woman's obstetrical knowledge consists mainly of superstitions and rituals that provide no actual help. Women labor for days without effective pain relief, often dying of exhaustion, blood loss, or infection. Postpartum care doesn't exist. New mothers are expected to return to full work responsibilities within days of giving birth, regardless of complications or their physical condition. Postpartum infections, which modern medicine prevents and treats easily, kill women regularly. Breastfeeding problems, which modern lactation consultants can resolve, result in malnourished babies who fail to thrive. Infectious diseases spread through your close-quartered community like wildfire. Smallpox, tuberculosis, pneumonia, and other diseases that modern vaccines and antibiotics have made rare or treatable are regular killers in your world. When someone develops a contagious illness, there's no way to isolate them effectively. They continue living in the same cramped space with everyone else, spreading disease through coughing, shared food, and contaminated surfaces. The progression of infectious disease is horrifying to witness. You watch family members and friends develop symptoms that grow progressively worse over days or weeks. Fever that makes them delirious. Coughing that brings up blood. Skin eruptions that ooze pus and leave permanent scars. Weakness that leaves them unable to feed themselves or control their bodily functions. And through it all, you know that you might be next because exposure is unavoidable in your living situation. Mental illness is completely misunderstood and often attributed to supernatural causes. Depression, anxiety, and other psychological conditions are seen as spiritual weaknesses or possession by evil spirits. Treatment consists of prayer, fasting, and sometimes physical abuse designed to drive out demons. People who would benefit from modern psychiatric care are instead subjected to treatments that make their conditions worse. Seasonal affective disorder is inevitable during the long, dark winter months, but there's no understanding of this condition or effective treatment for it. You become deeply depressed as the days grow shorter and the isolation more complete. The combination of poor nutrition, constant stress, lack of sunlight, and social pressure creates psychological conditions that push people towards suicide and violence. Surgery, when attempted, is performed without anesthesia, antiseptic techniques, or proper instruments. Operations are conducted with whatever sharp tools are available: knives used for food preparation, needles used for sewing, heated metal implements that serve as crude cautery devices. The patient is held down by multiple people, while crude procedures are performed by someone whose surgical knowledge comes from treating injured animals. Wound care consists of washing injuries with water that may or may not be clean, applying poultices made from plants that may or may not have healing properties, and hoping infection doesn't set in. Many minor injuries that modern medicine would treat easily become serious, life-threatening conditions. A simple cut on your hand could lead to blood poisoning that kills you within days. Broken bones are set using crude splints made from whatever materials are available: strips of wood, leather bindings, cloth wrappings. There's no X-ray technology to ensure proper alignment. No cast materials to maintain position during healing. Bones heal poorly, often leaving you permanently disabled with limbs that are shorter, weaker, or positioned incorrectly. Chronic diseases that modern medicine manages effectively are death sentences in your world. Diabetes kills quickly without insulin. Heart conditions cause sudden death with no warning or treatment options. Kidney disease leads to slow, painful death as toxins accumulate in your body. Cancer grows unchecked until it causes agonizing death through organ failure or blood loss. The psychological impact of constant medical suffering affects everyone in your community. You live with the knowledge that any illness or injury could kill you quickly and painfully. You watch people you care about suffer and die from conditions that seem minor by modern standards. The fear of pain and death becomes a constant background, anxiety that colors every aspect of your life. Still think natural healing was superior to modern medicine? You exist within a rigid social hierarchy that determines every aspect of your life, from what you eat to whom you can marry to how you'll die. Your social class was fixed at birth, and there is virtually no possibility of improving your position through effort, talent, or achievement. If you were born a thrall, slave, you will remain a slave until you die, and your children will be slaves after you. If you were born a carl, free farmer, you might achieve modest prosperity through luck and hard work, but you will never join the jarl, noble class that rules over everyone else. Slavery is not a historical curiosity or an economic system that affects people you don't know personally. Slaves live in your community, work alongside you, and suffer visibly every day. They are property, bought and sold like livestock, with no rights, no protection from abuse, and no hope of freedom except through the rare mercy of their owners. Many slaves are prisoners of war, people who were free like you until violence destroyed their communities and reduced them to living tools. The treatment of slaves is brutally casual in its cruelty. They receive the worst food, the most dangerous, work assignments, and clothing that provides inadequate protection from the elements. Female slaves are sexually available to their owners and any free men who desire them, with no legal recourse for rape or abuse. Male slaves perform back-breaking labor that often kills them through exhaustion, injury, or exposure. Children born to slave women are automatically slaves themselves, inheriting a lifetime of suffering. Violence against slaves is not just tolerated, but expected. Owners beat their slaves for real or imagined infractions, sometimes killing them in fits of anger, with no legal consequences. A slave who strikes a free person can be executed immediately, while a free person who kills a slave might pay a small fine equivalent to the cost of replacing damaged property. This creates an atmosphere of constant tension where the enslaved live in terror while the free become accustomed to inflicting suffering on their fellow humans. Even among free people, violence is the primary means of resolving disputes. There are no police, no courts in the modern sense, and no legal system that provides justice through peaceful means. When someone wrongs you, your options are to accept the injury and be marked as weak, or to respond with violence that might escalate into blood feuds lasting generations. Most conflicts are resolved through combat, either immediate fights or formal duels that determine guilt or innocence through trial by battle. Women exist in a state of permanent legal inferiority that would shock modern sensibilities. A woman cannot own property, make legal contracts, or speak in public assemblies. She is first the property of her father, then her husband, then her sons if she becomes widowed. Her value is measured primarily by her ability to produce male heirs and her skill at domestic work. A woman who fails to bear children or produces only daughters is considered a disappointment and burden on her family. Marriage is a business transaction between families, not a romantic relationship between individuals. Women have no say in whom they marry. Fathers arrange marriages to strengthen alliances, settle debts, or improve social position. A woman might be married to a man she has never met, someone much older, or someone known to be violent or cruel. Her feelings about the arrangement are irrelevant to everyone involved in the negotiation. Sexual violence against women is common and largely unpunished. A man who rapes a woman from his own social class might face retaliation from her male relatives, but the crime is considered an offense against her family's honor, rather than against the woman herself. Women from lower social classes or slave women can be assaulted with virtual impunity. The concept of consent, as modern people understand it, simply doesn't exist in your legal and social framework. Children have no rights and limited protection from abuse. They are considered the property of their fathers, who can sell them into slavery, kill them if they are unwanted, or abandon them to die if resources are scarce. Child mortality is so high that parents often don't name their children until they survive their first winter, and emotional attachment is deliberately limited to reduce the psychological damage when children die. Physical punishment of children is routine and severe. Beatings that would be considered criminal child abuse in modern societies are normal disciplinary measures. Children who disobey, show disrespect, or fail to work hard enough are beaten with sticks, straps, or whatever implements are available. Some children are permanently disabled by punishments that go too far, but this is considered an acceptable risk of proper child rearing. The legal system, such as it exists, is based on the ability to provide compensation rather than principles of justice. Crimes are resolved by paying weregild, blood money that varies based on the social class of the victim and the perpetrator. A wealthy person can literally get away with murder by paying the appropriate fine, while a poor person might be executed for stealing food to feed his starving family. Class distinctions affect every aspect of daily life in ways that constantly reinforce social inequality. Wealthy jarls eat meat regularly while poor farmers subsist on thin gruel. Nobles wear clothing made from fine materials and decorated with precious metals, while commoners dress in rough, undyed wool. The wealthy live in separate buildings or private sections of longhouses, while the poor crowd together in communal spaces. Political power is concentrated in the hands of wealthy men who make decisions affecting entire communities without consulting those who will bear the consequences. These leaders are often chosen through violence, successful warriors who can command loyalty through fear and the promise of shared plunder from raids. Their decisions are influenced by personal interests, family connections, and religious beliefs rather than any consideration of justice or the common good. Raids and warfare are glorified as noble activities that bring honor to participants and wealth to communities. Young men are encouraged to join raiding parties that attack neighboring settlements, killing adult men, enslaving women and children, and stealing anything valuable. These raids are not defensive actions, but aggressive campaigns designed to acquire wealth and establish reputations for violence that deter future attacks. The psychological effects of constant violence permeate every aspect of social interaction. Everyone has witnessed brutal killings, participated in or survived physical attacks, and lost family members to violence. This creates a society where aggression is normalized, empathy is considered weakness, and peaceful resolution of conflicts is seen as cowardice. Children grow up expecting violence and learning to use it as their primary tool for achieving goals. Honor culture demands that perceived insults be answered with disproportionate violence. A casual comment that would be ignored in modern society might trigger a fight to the death if it's interpreted as questioning someone's courage, honesty, or masculinity. This creates social interactions where people constantly monitor each other for signs of disrespect and prepare to respond with immediate violence. Blood feuds consume enormous amounts of energy and resources that could otherwise be used for productive activities. Families spend generations planning revenge, training for combat, and accumulating weapons instead of focusing on farming, crafting, or other peaceful pursuits. These feuds often expand to include extended family members, allies, and entire communities, creating conflicts that devastate regions for decades. The cycle of retaliatory violence is self-perpetuating and escalating. Each act of revenge must be greater than the original offense to restore honor, leading to increasingly brutal attacks that spread suffering to people who had nothing to do with the original dispute. Children are raised hearing stories of past wrongs and preparing to continue conflicts they didn't start and don't fully understand. Still think social hierarchies were more natural and just in historical societies? Death comes early and often in your world, and it rarely arrives with the dignity or peaceful closure that modern people expect. The average lifespan is perhaps 35 years, if you're lucky, but most people die much younger from causes that would be easily preventable or treatable today. You live with the constant knowledge that tomorrow could bring your end, and that end will likely be painful, frightening, and alone. Disease is the most common killer, and it shows no mercy based on age, social status, or moral character. A simple cold can develop into pneumonia that kills within days, as your lungs fill with fluid, and you slowly suffocate while your family watches helplessly. There are no antibiotics, no oxygen therapy, no medical interventions that might save you. You die gasping for air, your lips turning blue, your body racked with fever and pain. Infections from minor wounds kill people regularly because there's no understanding of bacteria or proper wound care. A small cut on your hand becomes red and inflamed, then develops pus-filled swelling that spreads up your arm. Your body burns with fever as blood poisoning courses through your system. You become delirious, alternating between unconsciousness and periods of agonized awareness. Your family performs whatever rituals they believe might help, but you die within a week of what started as a trivial injury. Childbirth kills women at horrifying rates, turning what should be a joyful event into a death sentence that entire families dread. Labor that goes on for days without medical intervention, bleeding that can't be stopped, infections that develop when unsanitary conditions introduce bacteria into traumatized tissue. Women die in agony, often taking their babies with them, leaving behind grieving families and motherless children who have little chance of survival. Starvation is a slow, cruel death that arrives with predictable regularity during harsh winters or after failed harvests. It doesn't kill you quickly. Instead, your body slowly consumes itself as you grow progressively thinner and weaker. Your hair falls out, your teeth loosen, your bones become visible through increasingly translucent skin. You lose the ability to think clearly as your brain is deprived of essential nutrients. Eventually, your heart simply stops beating because it lacks the energy to continue. Children die with heartbreaking frequency from causes that seem almost trivial today. A bout of diarrhea that lasts too long, dehydrating a small body that has no reserves to draw upon. Respiratory infections that overwhelm immature immune systems. Accidents that occur because there's no safe place for children to play, and no adult supervision adequate to prevent all mishaps. Parents expect to lose half their children before age 5, and they develop emotional defenses that make them seem callous by modern standards. Exposure to cold kills people who can't maintain adequate warmth during brutal winter months. Hypothermia sets in gradually, making you drowsy and confused as your body temperature drops. You stop shivering, which seems like relief, until you realize it means your body has given up trying to generate heat. You fall asleep and simply don't wake up, freezing to death in your own bed despite being surrounded by family members who are powerless to save you. Violence claims many lives through warfare, raids, feuds, and simple disputes that escalate beyond control. Death in battle is supposedly glorious, but the reality is terrifying and painful. Swords and axes cause horrific wounds that lead to slow death through blood loss. Spears pierce vital organs, causing internal bleeding that kills over hours or days. Warriors die screaming, begging for water, calling for their mothers as life ebbs away on muddy battlefields. Accidents kill people regularly because life requires constant interaction with dangerous tools, animals, and environments. Axes slip and sever limbs, causing fatal blood loss. Horses kick heads and crush skulls. People fall from roofs while doing repairs, breaking bones that pierce internal organs. Fires spread and burn people alive in wooden structures that have no fire safety measures. Every daily activity carries risks that can turn fatal without warning. Drowning is common because travel often requires crossing rivers, lakes, and coastal waters in primitive boats that offer little safety. Most people can't swim, so falling overboard means certain death unless rescue comes immediately. Boats capsize in storms, dumping entire families into freezing water, where they die of hypothermia within minutes. Bodies wash ashore days later, if they're ever found at all. Poisoning occurs regularly because there's limited knowledge about which plants, fungi, and other substances are safe to consume. Desperate people eat whatever they can find during famines, sometimes consuming toxic materials that cause agonizing death through organ failure. Even medicinal herbs can be deadly if prepared incorrectly or consumed in wrong quantities. You die vomiting blood, your body racked with seizures as toxins destroy your nervous system. Old age, when it comes at all, brings a different kind of suffering. Without understanding of nutrition, exercise, or medical care, elderly people develop conditions that make their final years miserable. Arthritis that makes movement agonizing. Cataracts that leave them functionally blind. Dental problems that make eating impossible. They become burdens on families that can barely support healthy members, often dying of neglect as much as disease. The dying process itself is usually prolonged and unpleasant. There are no pain medications to ease suffering, no understanding of palliative care that might make death more comfortable. You might lie in agony for days or weeks, conscious enough to experience pain but too weak to care for yourself. Your family does what they can, but their options are limited to prayer, folk remedies, and simple comfort measures that provide little actual relief from your agony. Your deathbed is whatever straw or hide can be spared from daily use, and it quickly becomes soiled with the fluids your failing body can no longer control. The smell of approaching death fills the cramped space, a sickly sweet odor mixed with human waste and the smoke from fires that burn constantly to provide what little warmth can be managed. Family members take turns sitting beside you, but they can't hide their anxiety about when this ordeal will end, because your prolonged dying means less food for everyone else and work that goes undone. When death finally comes, it's rarely the peaceful slipping away that movies portray. More often, it's a violent struggle as your body fights desperately to continue functioning. You might experience seizures, labored breathing that sounds like drowning, or delirium that makes you cry out in terror at visions only you can see. Your family watches helplessly as you suffer through your final moments, knowing they've done everything possible but feeling utterly powerless against the inevitable. Burial practices reflect the harsh realities of death in your time. If you die in winter, your body might be stored in a cold shed until spring when the ground thaws enough for digging. During epidemic periods, bodies are buried in mass graves with minimal ceremony because there's simply no time for individual attention. Your grave marker, if you get one at all, will be a simple stone that bears no inscription because most people can't read or write. Within a generation, your exact burial location will be forgotten. But this is a Viking village, and if you're fortunate enough to die in battle or with honor, your death takes on mythical significance. Warriors who fall in combat are believed to be chosen by the Valkyries for Valhalla, where they'll feast and fight until Ragnarok. This belief transforms death from pure tragedy into something approaching triumph, but only if you die the right way. Most deaths, from disease, accident, or old age, carry no such glory. The funeral rites for an honored warrior are spectacular and terrifying. Your body is placed in a longship along with weapons, jewelry, food, and sometimes sacrificed animals or even slaves who are killed to accompany you into the afterlife. The ship is set ablaze, creating a massive funeral pyre that burns through the night while your kinsmen drink and tell stories of your deeds. The flames consume everything, leaving only ashes that scatter on the wind. But even honored deaths are rare luxuries in your world. Most people die forgotten, their names lost to history, their lives reduced to brief mentions in family memories that fade within a few generations. You live knowing that your entire existence, all your struggles, loves, hopes, and fears, will be completely erased from human memory within 50 years of your death. Still think you could survive in a Viking village? Still believe that simpler times were somehow better than the complex modern world you inhabit today? You've walked through a single day in a life that millions of people actually lived, and you've barely scratched the surface of what existence truly meant in the harsh world of medieval Scandinavia. Every comfort you take for granted, clean water, abundant food, medical care, physical safety, personal freedom, was an impossible luxury in that world. Every assumption you make about basic human dignity, individual rights, and social mobility was meaningless in a society built on survival at any cost. The Vikings you've lived among weren't the romanticized warriors of popular culture. They were desperate people trapped in a brutal environment, fighting constantly against nature, disease, hunger, and each other, just to see another sunrise. Their raids and conquests weren't glorious adventures. They were acts of desperation by people who faced starvation and death if they couldn't take resources from others. Their violence wasn't noble. It was the necessary currency of a world where weakness meant extinction. Your modern complaints about work stress, relationship drama, political disagreements, or social media problems would be incomprehensible to someone from that era. You worry about career advancement while they worried about literally freezing to death. You stress about social status while they feared being murdered for offending someone more powerful. You struggle with existential questions about meaning and purpose, while they fought daily battles against forces that could kill them without warning. The gap between your world and theirs isn't just technological, it's philosophical, emotional, and spiritual. You live in a universe where individual human life has inherent value, where suffering is seen as a problem to be solved rather than simply accepted, where the future is expected to be better than the past. They lived in a cosmos where death was constant, pain was inevitable, and tomorrow would likely be worse than today. Consider the simple act of reading these words right now. You're sitting in relative comfort, probably in a heated or cooled building, with artificial light allowing you to see clearly regardless of the time of day. You're not hungry, not cold, not in physical pain, not afraid for your immediate survival. You have the luxury of intellectual curiosity, the privilege of learning about the past for entertainment, rather than desperately seeking information that might keep you alive another day. The Viking villagers whose lives you've briefly inhabited had none of these advantages. They lived entire lifetimes without ever reading a single word, never traveling more than a few miles from their birthplace, never experiencing the joy of learning something simply because it interested them. Their mental universe was bounded by the immediate needs of survival and the limited folklore of their culture. They died without ever knowing that vast civilizations existed beyond their small world, without understanding the basic principles of hygiene that might have saved their lives, without access to the accumulated knowledge of humanity that you carry in your pocket. Yet they were not stupid, weak, or inferior human beings. They were people exactly like you, with the same capacity for love, creativity, humor, and hope. They simply had the misfortune to be born into a world that offered few opportunities to express those qualities. Their intelligence was channeled into memorizing weather patterns that could predict deadly storms. Their creativity was expressed through intricate metalwork and wood carving done by flickering firelight. Their love was demonstrated through the willingness to share scarce food with family members. Their hope was invested in beliefs about honor and afterlife that made their brutal existence bearable. The tragedy isn't that they lived such difficult lives. It's that they never had the chance to experience the possibilities that you take for granted. They never knew that life could be different, that humans could create societies based on principles other than might makes right, that individuals could pursue dreams beyond mere survival. They accepted their world as natural and inevitable, because they had no framework for imagining alternatives. This is what makes historical perspective so valuable and so humbling. You are not inherently superior to the people who lived in that Viking village. You're simply the beneficiary of centuries of accumulated knowledge, technological advancement, and social evolution that they helped create through their struggles and sacrifices. Every comfort you enjoy, every freedom you exercise, every opportunity you have was built on the foundation of their suffering and determination. The next time you complain about your Wi-Fi being slow, remember the Viking villager who never heard a human voice from more than a few hundred yards away. When you're frustrated that your food delivery is late, think about the person who ate the same simple porridge every day for their entire life. When you're annoyed by a minor inconvenience, recall the countless people who died in agony from problems that modern medicine could solve with a single pill. You wouldn't last a day in a Viking village not because you're weak, but because you've never had to develop the specific skills and mental toughness that world required. You couldn't make fire from scratch, couldn't preserve food without refrigeration, couldn't defend yourself with medieval weapons, couldn't survive without the countless invisible systems that support your existence. But more than that, you couldn't emotionally handle the constant awareness of mortality, the acceptance of pain as normal, the resignation to a limited and predictable life. And that's something to be grateful for rather than ashamed of. You live in a world where such adaptations are unnecessary, where human creativity and compassion have created systems that protect you from the brutal realities that once defined existence. You have the privilege of considering whether life has meaning beyond survival, of pursuing goals more complex than simply staying alive another day. The Viking villagers who lived and died in that harsh world weren't just historical curiosities or entertainment for your modern sensibilities. They were real people whose lives mattered, whose struggles were genuine, whose hopes and fears were as valid as your own. They deserve to be remembered not as primitive ancestors who we've surpassed, but as fellow humans who faced impossible circumstances with whatever courage and dignity they could muster. Their world is gone forever, transformed by the very forces of change that they helped set in motion through their raids, trades, and cultural exchanges. The Viking Age ended not because those people failed, but because they succeeded in creating connections that eventually led to the globalized, interconnected world you inhabit today. Their descendants became the explorers, merchants, and settlers who spread Scandinavian influence across Europe and beyond, contributing to the cultural mixing that eventually produced modernity. So the next time you flip a light switch, turn on a tap, or pick up your phone, remember the people who lived and died in darkness, thirst, and isolation. The next time you take a hot shower, visit a doctor, or simply assume you'll live to see tomorrow, think about those who never experienced such luxuries. Not to make you feel guilty about your advantages, but to help you appreciate the extraordinary, historical moment you're living through. You are living in the most prosperous, safe, and free period in human history. You have access to more information, more opportunities, and more choices than any human beings who came before you. You can travel anywhere, communicate with anyone, learn anything, and pursue dreams that would have been inconceivable to people in earlier eras. This didn't happen by accident. It's the result of countless generations of human struggle, innovation, and sacrifice. The Vikings, whose lives you've briefly inhabited, were part of that long chain of human effort that eventually led to your comfortable existence. Their raids and explorations, their technological innovations, their cultural exchanges, and yes, even their violence and destruction, all contributed to the historical processes that created the modern world. They lived brutal, short lives so that you could live a long, comfortable one. That's the real lesson of historical perspective. Not that the past was better or worse than the present, but that every moment of human existence is connected to every other moment through invisible threads of cause and effect. The Viking villager who died of an infected wound in the 9th century is linked to you through a chain of events that spans over 1,000 years. Their death contributed to population pressures that led to further raids. Those raids led to cultural exchanges that spread technology and ideas. Those exchanges eventually contributed to the social and economic developments that made your world possible. You are living the dream that countless historical people died trying to achieve, a life of security, comfort, opportunity, and hope. The fact that you're reading about their struggles rather than living them yourself is proof that humanity has made genuine progress, that the arc of history does bend towards something better than pure survival. But it's also a reminder that this progress is fragile and hard-won. The comfortable world you inhabit could disappear if the systems that support it collapse. The freedoms you enjoy could be lost if people stop defending them. The prosperity you take for granted could vanish if the complex networks that create it break down. You are only a few catastrophes away from living a life very much like that Viking villager, struggling for survival in a world that offers no guarantees. This is why understanding history matters, not just as academic knowledge, but as emotional and spiritual preparation for the uncertainties of existence. The people who lived in that Viking village faced their hardships with whatever courage, wisdom, and hope they could muster. They found meaning in lives that were objectively difficult and often tragic. They created bonds of love and loyalty that sustained them through unimaginable challenges. They maintained their humanity in circumstances that could easily have destroyed it. You carry their DNA, their cultural inheritance, and their capacity for resilience. If circumstances required it, you too could learn to live with hardship, find meaning in struggle, and maintain hope in the face of overwhelming odds. The comfortable life you lead today doesn't make you weak. It makes you lucky. But luck is temporary, and the human qualities that enabled survival in harsh historical periods are permanent parts of your inheritance. So remember the Viking villagers not as exhibits in history's museum, but as your ancestors in the deepest sense.